I still remember that evening very clearly, even though I try not to. The house was full of light that day. Laughter echoed from room to room. Plates were set on the table. Music played softly in the background. Everyone was celebrating something important. Everyone except me. I sat alone in my small room at the end of the hallway, listening to sounds that no longer felt like home. I did not cry. I did not complain. I just sat there, holding my hands together, wondering how a mother could feel so invisible inside the house she once built with love. That was the day I understood something painful. It was not one big moment. It was a quiet realization that slowly settled in my heart. My son had forgotten me, not because he was cruel, not because he hated me, but because life moved forward for him. And somehow, I stayed behind. I smiled that night when he walked past my door without stopping. I smiled because I did not want him to see the sadness on my face. A mother learns early how to hide pain. I used to believe that silence was a small thing. I thought silence meant peace. But silence can be heavy. It can sit on your chest and make it hard to breathe. Days passed when my phone did not ring. Weeks went by without a question, without a visit, without a simple "Are you okay?" I told myself he was busy. I told myself this was normal. I told myself not to expect too much. Mothers are good at making excuses for their children. At a tea night, when the house finally became quiet, I would lie awake and replay old memories. I remembered holding his tiny hand when he took his first steps. I remembered the sound of his laughter when I lifted him into the air. I remembered staying awake through long nights when he was sick, whispering soft words until his breathing slowed. Back then, he needed me for everything. I never imagined a day would come when he would not need me at all. People think loneliness comes from being alone. That is not always true. Sometimes loneliness comes from being surrounded by people who no longer see you. I would sit at the dinner table and listen to conversations that did not include me. Plans were made without my name. Decisions were taken without my voice. I became a quiet presence, like an old piece of furniture that everyone walks past but no one really notices anymore. I often ask myself if I had done something wrong. Maybe I had loved too much. Maybe I had given too much. Maybe I had stayed quiet when I should have spoken. Or maybe this was just how life worked. Children grow up. They build their own worlds. And parents slowly fade into the background. No one warns you how painful that fading can be. There were moments when I wanted to speak. Moments when words reached my lips but never came out. I did not want to sound needy. I did not want to be a burden. I did not want to be the mother who complains. So I swallowed my feelings and carried on. I learned how to smile with a heavy heart. I learned how to pretend that everything was fine. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the sky turn dark, I whispered a quiet prayer. Not for myself, but for him. I asked God to keep my son safe. I asked God to give him peace. I did not ask for love in return. I did not ask for attention. I only asked for strength to accept whatever role I had left in his life. Sometimes faith is the only place where a broken heart can rest, but deep inside, there was a small part of me that still hoped. A small voice that said, "One day he will see. One day he will understand the silence. One day he will remember the woman who stood behind him long before anyone else did." That hope was fragile, but it kept me going. It was like a small candle burning in a dark room. This story is not about anger. It is not about blame. It is about a mother's quiet pain. It is about years of silence that spoke louder than words. And it is about the long road between being forgotten and finally being understood. My story begins here, in this quiet moment, where love remained even when everything else seemed to disappear. Before life became quiet and heavy, our home used to feel warm and full. It was not a big house, but it carried many memories. Every corner had a story. The kitchen smelled of simple meals cooked with care. The living room held laughter, late talks, and small arguments that ended in smiles. My son grew up in this house. He learned how to walk here. He learned how to dream here. And I believed, back then, that this house would always be a place he returned to, no matter how far life took him. I raised my son mostly on my own. His father worked long hours and was often away. So I became everything. I became the one who woke him for school, the one who helped with homework, the one who listened when he was confused or afraid. I never felt tired doing it. Love has a way of giving strength without asking anything in return. I did not think of the future much. I only focused on raising a good human being. As he grew older, he became independent. He was kind, smart, and hopeful. People liked him easily. I felt proud watching him step into the world with confidence. When he told me he was in love, I smiled and listened carefully. I wanted to know everything. I wanted to support him. I told myself that love was a blessing and that marriage would bring him happiness. I truly believed that adding someone new to the family would make our bond stronger, not weaker. The wedding day was beautiful. The house was full again, just like old times. Guests came and went. Music played. Everyone smiled for photos. I stood quietly in the background, watching my son start a new chapter. There was joy in my heart, but also a strange feeling I could not explain. It felt like standing at the edge of something unknown. Still, I pushed that feeling away. I told myself this was normal. This was life moving forward. After the marriage, things changed slowly. Not suddenly. Not in a dramatic way. Just small shifts that were easy to ignore at first. My son stopped sitting with me in the evenings. His phone was always in his hand. Conversations became shorter. Plans were made without asking me. I noticed these things, but I said nothing. I did not want to seem controlling. I did not want to interfere. They decided to live with me at first. I thought it would bring us closer. I imagined shared meals, shared laughter, shared responsibilities. I imagined becoming part of their new life. But instead, I began to feel like a guest in my own home. The kitchen no longer felt like mine. The living room felt quieter when I entered. Sometimes conversations stopped when I walked in. I told myself I was imagining it. I tried my best to adjust. I stayed out of the way. I kept my opinions to myself. I respected boundaries I was never told about. I woke up early so I would not disturb anyone. I went to bed early so I would not feel the emptiness of late-night silence. I told myself that sacrifice was part of being a mother. That love meant letting go. My son was not unkind. That is important to say. He did not shout. He did not insult me. He simply became distant. And distance can hurt more than harsh words. Days passed when we barely spoke. He seemed happy, and I did not want to take that happiness away by sharing my pain. So I carried it alone. Sometimes I would sit and remember how he used to run into the house calling my name. How he used to share every small detail of his day. How he used to ask for advice, for comfort, for reassurance. I wondered when I stopped being part of his world. I wondered if he even noticed my silence. Friends would ask about my family. I would smile and say everything was fine. I learned how to hide the truth behind gentle words. At night, when everyone slept, I would talk to God in whispers. I did not ask for things to go back to how they were. I only asked for patience, for understanding, for peace in my heart. This part of my life was quiet, but not empty. It was filled with thoughts, memories, and unspoken emotions. It was the calm before the deeper pain. The space where love still existed, even though it was no longer returned in the same way. And this was only the beginning of a longer journey, one that would test my heart in ways I never expected. The days after my son's marriage passed quietly at first, but slowly, tension began to creep into our home. It did not arrive with loud arguments or dramatic scenes. No, it arrived in small gestures, in unspoken words, in glances that carried more than they should. I noticed it the first time when I offered to make a simple cup of tea, and my daughter-in-law waved me away with a smile that did not reach her eyes. I smiled back, quietly setting the kettle down. A small moment, but it left a ripple in my heart that I could not ignore. Even my son started to behave differently. He did not mean to hurt me. I knew that. He had his new life now, his own routines, his responsibilities. Still, I could see it in the way he avoided sitting with me at the table. He asked fewer questions about my day. He spoke less of the things that mattered to me. Sometimes I wondered if he realized how empty the house felt when he was busy elsewhere. I told myself to be patient, to wait, to hope that he would come back. Conversations with my daughter-in-law became a careful dance. I tried to understand her world, her needs, her worries. But every time I reached out with kindness, there seemed to be a wall that kept me at a distance. I began to sense small complaints behind my back, whispers I could not confirm but could feel in the silence. The house that once felt warm now carried a subtle chill, like a gentle wind passing through empty rooms. It was the small incidents that stung the most. A dinner prepared for everyone but me. Plans made without asking if I would like to join. Birthday celebrations that felt like I was invisible. I told myself these were trivial matters. I repeated the mantra of every quiet mother: do not take it personally. This is just life moving forward. Yet at night, my chest would tighten, and my eyes would fill with tears I refused to let fall. I tried to speak with my son about the distance I felt, but the words caught in my throat. How could I tell him that I felt invisible in my own home without making him feel guilty? So I stayed silent. I watched as the small rifts grew, feeling powerless. The more I held back, the more I realized how easily family ties could fray when care and attention were taken for granted. There were days when I felt completely alone, even when the house was full. I would sit in the living room quietly, listening to laughter that did not include me. My son and daughter-in-law would speak of plans and decisions, and I would be a shadow in the background, silently observing, silently wishing things were different. I learned that silence could be both a shield and a punishment. It shielded me from confrontations but punished me with isolation. One evening, as I prepared a simple meal for myself, I overheard my daughter-in-law speaking to a friend on the phone. Her words were not cruel, but they carried a subtle disapproval of me, as if my presence was inconvenient. I felt a pang of sadness that I could not shake. I wondered if my son noticed the hurt hidden behind my quiet demeanor. I wondered if he even realized how much I had given, how much I had sacrificed, and how much I had loved without expecting anything in return. I began to notice patterns. Little habits that were exclusionary, invitations that never came, decisions that were made without consulting me. It was as if the house had slowly shifted ownership, and I was no longer part of it. I tried to remind myself that this was not hatred. It was simply life changing, and people sometimes forget the quiet ones who love them the most. But reminding myself did not make the ache go away. Some nights, I would go to my bedroom and speak to God in whispers. I did not ask for revenge. I did not ask for punishment. I asked for patience. I asked for strength. I asked for guidance on how to navigate the growing distance between me and my son, between me and the family I had once nurtured. I realized that sometimes love meant enduring hurt silently, and hope meant believing that understanding could come in its own time. The rising tension was not just about neglect. It was about the subtle ways relationships shift without anyone fully realizing it. I could see it in small gestures, the way my son no longer offered his hand to help me with groceries, the way my daughter-in-law rearranged the furniture without asking for my input, the way conversations continued without my voice. Each act seemed small alone, but together, they formed a wall between us that grew taller each day. I often replayed memories of the past to make sense of the present. I remembered bedtime stories, small lessons taught with patience, the evenings spent laughing around the table. Those memories were bittersweet. They reminded me of the love that existed before silence became a companion. And yet, even as the tension rose, I held on to the belief that someday, my son would see, someday, he would understand the quiet pain that I carried for so long. As weeks turned into months, the small moments of tension began to stack into a weight I could no longer ignore. It was not sudden. Life rarely arrives with clear warnings. Instead, it was in subtle glances, in conversations that excluded me, in the quiet shifting of attention away from me. I began to notice that my son no longer sought my opinion. The questions about his day, the little discussions about plans or concerns, all disappeared. Even when he spoke to me, it was brief, polite, and distant. I wondered when the warmth that had once existed between us began to fade. My daughter-in-law's behavior added to the unease. She was not cruel, at least not intentionally, but there was a coldness in her manner that made me hesitate to speak. I offered advice sometimes, thinking it might help. Sometimes I offered a meal I knew he liked, or a story from his childhood that might bring a smile. But I often felt my words were brushed aside or ignored. It was as if I existed in the house, but not in the hearts of those I loved the most. Each ignored gesture pierced a quiet hole in my heart. Even routine family gatherings became difficult. When my son invited friends over, I noticed how the attention shifted entirely to the younger guests. My presence seemed invisible. I remembered thinking that this was not how it was supposed to feel. Children grow, yes, but they do not have to forget the people who raised them. I tried to stay patient, to stay kind, to remain in my own quiet space. I reminded myself, silence does not mean weakness, and love does not always ask for recognition. Conversations became strained. I sensed judgments in words that were not directly spoken. A comment about the house needing a fresh touch felt like a judgment of me. A suggestion about changing routines felt like a removal of my role. I realized slowly and painfully that I was being pushed to the edges of my own home. My son did not mean harm. He simply did not notice the distance growing, did not see the cracks widening, did not realize how much his absence hurt me. But absence, even unintentional, carries its own kind of weight. One afternoon, I attempted to ask my son about his plans for the weekend, hoping to spend a few hours together. He smiled politely, nodded, and said he already had arrangements, barely glancing at me. I swallowed the hurt and smiled back. I reminded myself that love was not always about being seen, about being noticed, about being included. Sometimes love was about giving without expectation, about enduring without complaint. But the ache in my chest would not be quieted. I began to spend more time in small, quiet activities that kept me occupied. Reading, knitting, walking in the garden. These things helped, but only slightly. The house was full, yet I felt the emptiness most when I was in the room where laughter and conversation no longer reached me. The silence was heavy. It wrapped around me like a fog, quiet but suffocating. I realized that growing old did not just mean physical change, it meant emotional endurance. A patience I had never known was possible. There were evenings when I would watch him play with his friends, or see him laugh with his wife, and I would feel a pang of sadness that I could not shake. It was not anger. It was not bitterness. It was the quiet sorrow of a mother who had loved deeply, who had given her all, and who now found herself forgotten. I would look away, pretend to be busy, let the tears form silently in my eyes without letting anyone notice. I also noticed the small gestures that used to bring warmth had disappeared. He no longer remembered birthdays, small favors, little things I once cherished. I tried not to be bitter, tried not to dwell on what was missing. But these small absences piled on each other, until every day carried the weight of being overlooked, unnoticed, unloved in the ways that matter most. Even words of kindness seemed less frequent. The warmth of attention, which I had thought unconditional, was now a rare and precious thing. And yet, even amid the growing distance, I held on to hope. Hope is fragile, but it is all a mother has when her child drifts away. I reminded myself of the times he had needed me, of the love that had once been mutual, of the lessons I had taught him, the patience I had shown. Perhaps I thought, one day he would remember. One day he would see the quiet sacrifice, the silent support, the years of love that went unnoticed. And until that day came, I would wait. It was a day like any other, yet it became the day everything shifted. The house was quiet in the morning, only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock filling the space. I had woken early as usual, making tea and preparing for the day. I kept my thoughts to myself, as I always did, quietly observing the rhythm of the household. But there was a tension in the air I could feel, even before I understood it. Something was about to happen, though I did not know what. My son entered the kitchen that morning, a stack of papers in his hands. His brow was furrowed, his voice tense. For a moment, I did not recognize the man who had once run to me with laughter and excitement. "Mom," he said, not unkindly, but with a seriousness I had rarely heard in his tone, "we need to talk." I nodded silently, motioning for him to sit. My heart pounded. Could he finally see what I had endured all these years? Could he finally understand the quiet hurt that had grown between us? The conversation started cautiously, like two people testing the waters after a long silence. He spoke of responsibilities, of pressures, of stress he had not shared. I listened, my heart holding both hope and fear. I did not interrupt. I did not accuse. I simply listened, because I knew that understanding often begins with being heard. He spoke of moments he had taken for granted, of people he had overlooked, and of a growing realization that things were not as they seemed. I could feel the weight of his words before he even said them. Then came the confession. The words that cut through years of silence like a sudden gust of wind. "Mom," he said, voice trembling, "I think I've been wrong. I think I've forgotten who really built my life, who has always been there for me. I didn't realize how much I've taken for granted." He paused, searching my face for a sign of forgiveness, for a reaction. I did not speak immediately. I wanted him to feel the full weight of his own realization. I wanted him to understand, deeply, the space his absence had created. I remembered all the nights I had spent alone, all the meals I had prepared quietly for myself, all the conversations I had held with God in the dark while everyone else laughed and celebrated without me. And now, here was the man I had raised, acknowledging that he had missed it all. My heart ached with both sorrow and relief. The pain of the past years did not vanish instantly, but the recognition was a balm, a first step toward healing. The turning point did not come with anger or shouting. It came with humility. It came with a quiet understanding that words, even after years of neglect, could open doors that had been closed too long. My son admitted that he had been blind to the little things that mattered, the small gestures, the moments of care, the love that had been constant even when he had failed to notice it. His apology was gentle, sincere, and full of emotion that only a mother could understand. In that moment, I realized that the turning point had been building for years. Every act of silence, every moment of distance, every ignored call or unspoken hurt had led us here, to a place of mutual recognition. He did not undo the past with his words, but he acknowledged it. He recognized my pain. And recognition, even without immediate change, is powerful. It is the seed from which understanding and forgiveness grow. We spent hours that morning talking, not about blame, not about past mistakes, but about truth. I shared my feelings, my experiences, and my quiet suffering. I spoke about the times I had felt invisible, about the small moments that had chipped away at our bond, and about the love that had never wavered. He listened, and I could see the realization deepening in his eyes, the weight of regret mingling with newfound understanding. This was the turning point, the moment when the invisible walls between us began to crack. From that day onward, I knew things would not be the same. The turning point is never about instant restoration. It is about awareness, about seeing clearly after years of distance and neglect. My son began to speak more often, to check in, to ask questions he had once overlooked. The atmosphere in the house slowly shifted. Laughter returned, tentative at first, then genuine. And although the pain of the past could never fully disappear, the bridge toward connection had begun to be rebuilt. And yet, even in this breakthrough, I remained cautious. The years of silence had taught me patience, the value of quiet endurance, and the strength found in waiting without complaint. I knew that real change takes time. A single conversation could not erase years of distance, but it could be the beginning. And sometimes that beginning is all we need to restore hope. After that morning, the house felt different, though the change was subtle at first. It was in the small gestures, my son asking if I wanted tea, checking in before he left for work, pausing in the hallway to smile or speak. It was as if the invisible wall that had grown between us over the years had started to crack. But the true turning point came later that evening, when I overheard a conversation I could not ignore. My son was talking quietly to his wife in the living room, the kind of hushed conversation that immediately draws a mother's curiosity. I sat nearby, pretending to read, but my ears caught every word. He was speaking with honesty, confessing the neglect he had shown, admitting the distance he had created, and acknowledging the love he had taken for granted. His voice trembled slightly, not in anger, but in the raw vulnerability of truth. For the first time in years, I heard the words that I had longed for: acknowledgement, understanding, and regret. He said things like, I didn't realize how much she gave for me, how much she did without asking for anything. I've been blind, and I feel awful for not noticing sooner. I felt my chest tighten, tears threatening to spill. The honesty in his voice was a balm for old wounds, even though those wounds could not be erased in a single evening. But recognition, I reminded myself, is the first step toward healing. That night, I decided to speak. I approached him slowly, my heart full, my voice calm. I heard what you said, I told him. It means more than you know. But the years of silence were heavy, and they cannot be forgotten. I want us to move forward, but we must do it together. He nodded, his eyes shining with tears. The first genuine connection in years. I could see the weight of his realization, the regret he carried, and the desire to make things right. That moment was fragile, yet it was powerful. It was the point where understanding began to outweigh neglect. We sat together for hours, speaking quietly about the past. I shared the small pains, the moments when I had felt invisible, and the quiet nights when I had prayed for him. He listened, sometimes in silence, sometimes with whispered apologies, sometimes with questions about why I had endured so long without complaint. And in that dialogue, I began to see a spark of change not just in his actions, but in his awareness. He was beginning to understand the depth of my love and the quiet sacrifices that had gone unnoticed. The turning point became more evident in the days that followed. He made an effort to include me, to ask for my opinions, to share small parts of his day again. The atmosphere in the house shifted slowly but unmistakably. Where once there had been tension, now there was cautious warmth. Where once there had been silence, now there was conversation, tentative at first, but genuine. I realized that true turning points are rarely sudden or dramatic. They unfold quietly, with moments of vulnerability and honesty. By the end of the week, I noticed a subtle transformation in my son. He sought my advice on matters small and large. He smiled more often in my presence. He included me in conversations and decisions. It was not perfect, but it was progress, and progress felt like hope. I felt a weight lift from my heart, even though the years of distance could not simply vanish. That evening, as I sat quietly in my favorite chair, I allowed myself to feel the warmth of being noticed, of being valued. Even after years of feeling invisible, I realized then that patience and endurance had their rewards. The love I had given quietly, without expectation, was now being recognized. The silence I had held had not been ignored by God or by time. Sometimes it takes years for someone to see what has been present all along. And though my heart carried the memories of hurt, it also carried the hope of renewal, of understanding, and of a bond slowly being rebuilt. The turning point was complete not with dramatic confrontation or harsh words but with gentle acknowledgement, heartfelt confession, and the willingness to bridge the gap. My son began to understand my pain, and in understanding, he began to heal alongside me. That night, as I closed my eyes, I felt a quiet peace. The journey was far from over, but the bridge had begun to form, and for the first time in years, I felt that love and recognition could once again coexist in our home. The days after the turning point felt like stepping into a soft morning after a long, cold night. Slowly, carefully, my son began to reconnect with me, not out of obligation but out of genuine understanding. He would ask how I felt about small things, seek my advice on minor decisions, and sometimes simply sit beside me without speaking. Those quiet moments spoke louder than any words could. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen. I realized that healing often begins in silence, in small gestures, in the unspoken acknowledgement of what has been lost and what can be rebuilt. Our conversations began to deepen. We talked about the past not to dwell on hurt, but to share our feelings and gain clarity. I told him about the nights I had cried quietly, the moments when I felt invisible, and the endless patience I had tried to uphold. I spoke not with anger, but with gentle honesty, letting him understand the weight of the years of neglect. He listened, sometimes with tears in his eyes, sometimes in thoughtful silence, but always with the desire to understand. That was the essence of reconciliation, the willingness to see the world through each other's eyes. It was not always easy. Some memories carried sharp edges that pricked at our hearts. There were days when old misunderstandings resurfaced, when unspoken words created tiny tensions. But the difference now was openness. Instead of letting resentment fester in silence, we acknowledged it and worked through it together. Each shared memory, each honest expression of emotion became a brick in the bridge we were rebuilding. The more we communicated, the more the house felt like a home again, not just walls and furniture, but warmth, connection, and belonging. I noticed the subtle changes in his actions. He began to include me in family decisions once again. He checked in more often, asking about my day, my feelings, and my thoughts on matters large and small. Meals were shared at the table, laughter returned, and the quiet companionship that had been absent for years began to reappear. My son's gestures were never grand, but they were sincere, and that sincerity mattered more than any dramatic act could have. I began to feel a sense of relief and peace, a quiet gratitude that our bond, though strained, was not broken beyond repair. There were also moments of reflection that I cherished deeply. I would watch him interact with his family, noticing the care he now showed in small ways. He seemed more aware of how actions affect others, more conscious of the love and support that surround him. It was as if he had awakened to a truth that had been present all along, that the foundation of family is built not only in shared joy but in quiet sacrifice, patience, and understanding. And in that awakening, I felt a profound sense of hope for the future. The resolution was not about erasing the past. It was about acceptance, forgiveness, and renewed connection. We could not undo the years of distance, the silent dinners, the unacknowledged efforts. But we could honor the love that persisted despite the neglect, and we could allow understanding to guide our actions moving forward. I realized that reconciliation is an ongoing process. It requires patience, empathy, and a willingness to see beyond hurt. And in that realization, I found my heart slowly mending. I also learned a vital lesson about love and endurance. True love does not demand recognition, and patience does not mean weakness. It means holding steady even when others fail to notice, speaking gently even when silence dominates, and remaining steadfast in the hope that understanding and compassion will eventually return. My son's awakening reminded me that even the smallest acts of awareness can transform relationships. And slowly, we began to live not in the shadow of past neglect, but in the light of newfound understanding. Even in those early days of resolution, I found myself smiling quietly, feeling gratitude for the small victories, shared meals, warm conversations, and the gentle acknowledgement that I mattered. It was a reminder that family bonds, though tested by time and distance, can endure when nurtured with patience, empathy, and love. And so, step by step, our home began to feel like a place of connection once again. A place where hearts once distant could slowly come together. As the days unfolded, the small gestures of connection began to accumulate into something larger, a true sense of reconciliation. My son did not suddenly become perfect, and I did not instantly forget the years of distance. But there was a shift, subtle yet profound, in the rhythm of our interactions. He began to anticipate my needs without being asked, checking if I was comfortable, asking if I wanted company during meals, or offering to help with small chores. These simple acts spoke volumes, louder than any apology could. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, he shared memories from his childhood, stories he had once forgotten or overlooked. He laughed softly, but there was a tenderness in his voice, a realization of the love and patience that had always surrounded him. I listened, my heart swelling with a quiet joy. The walls that had divided us were no longer solid. They had become openings through which connection and understanding could flow. I realized that resolution is not always dramatic. It is in these quiet, meaningful exchanges that the heart truly heals. The most moving moment came when he spontaneously held my hand and said, "Mom, I see now. I finally understand all the little things you did for me. I've been blind for too long." I felt tears well up, but this time they were not tears of sorrow, they were tears of relief and gratitude. For the first time in many years, I felt fully acknowledged, fully valued, fully loved in the way that matters most. The silence that had once separated us was replaced by heartfelt communication, trust, and a renewed sense of closeness. Even our conversations about past misunderstandings transformed into moments of learning and growth. Instead of pointing fingers, we reflected on what went wrong, why it happened, and how we could move forward. Each discussion strengthened our bond, teaching us patience, empathy, and the importance of honesty. I realized that true resolution is not about erasing the past, it is about recognizing it, learning from it, and using it to build a stronger foundation for the future. The home, once quiet and distant, became warm again. Meals were shared, laughter returned, and the once faded family traditions regained their place. My son now made a conscious effort to include me, valuing my presence and input. Even the little routines, the morning coffee we shared, the short walks in the garden, the evenings spent talking quietly became precious moments of connection. These small threads of attention and care wove together to create a tapestry of restored love and understanding. I also noticed a transformation within myself. The patience I had cultivated during years of silence now bore fruit in the form of peace and resilience. I realized that enduring neglect with quiet strength was not in vain. It had prepared me to meet reconciliation with grace, to appreciate each step of understanding, and to embrace forgiveness without resentment. I had learned that true love is unconditional, and sometimes, the greatest gift we give is the space for others to awaken to what they have overlooked. As resolution deepened, I saw the man my son had become, a man shaped by experience, capable of reflection, and now aware of the weight of his actions. And I felt hope not just for him, not just for me, but for the bond we shared, which, though tested, had endured. Healing, I realized, is not instant. It is gradual, quiet, and persistent, like a stream carving a path through rock. And in that slow, steady process, we found each other again. This period of resolution taught me that love, patience, and understanding are far more powerful than hurt, neglect, or distance. Even after years of silence, hearts can reconnect. Even after moments of being overlooked, love can be recognized. And even when relationships falter, hope, humility, and sincerity can rebuild them. I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the quiet endurance of the past, which had prepared us for this renewed connection. The days grew gentler after the resolution had begun to settle in. Mornings felt lighter, the sunlight streaming through the windows carrying a warmth that seemed to reflect the change in our hearts. I noticed the subtle shifts, my son no longer passing by without a word, the house filled with small acknowledgments, smiles that lingered, and conversations that were honest and patient. It was as though the air itself had softened, and with it, the years of distance and misunderstanding began to fade. Replaced by quiet understanding, I often sat in the living room in the late afternoon, a cup of tea in my hands, watching him move about the house. There was a care in his actions that had not been there before. He paused to ask how I was. He included me in decisions. He listened when I shared thoughts I had held for years without acknowledgement. It was a gentle reminder that even after long neglect, hearts can realign, and relationships can heal. This peace, though tender, was real, and I felt gratitude for each small moment of connection. Our conversations became the heart of this new chapter. We spoke about the past, not with accusation or resentment, but with honesty and reflection. I shared the quiet loneliness I had endured, the subtle hurts I had carried, and the patience I had tried to hold with love rather than bitterness. He listened, sometimes in silence, sometimes with tears, and sometimes with whispered apologies. I realized then that true understanding is not immediate, it grows in small, steady moments, in vulnerability, in the willingness to acknowledge mistakes and accept responsibility. One evening, as we sat together by the window watching the sun dip behind the horizon, he reached for my hand and said, "Mom, I finally understand your pain. I will never forget it again." The words, simple as they were, carried a weight that years of neglect could never diminish. In that quiet exchange, I felt the depth of forgiveness and recognition, the first real sense of closure we had shared. And though the past could not be erased, The present offered a chance to rebuild what had been strained. I also reflected on the lessons these years had taught me. Patience, endurance, and quiet love are not weaknesses, they are the foundation for resilience. Even when neglected, unseen, or taken for granted, the heart that gives freely and endures silently is capable of extraordinary strength. I had learned that reconciliation is a process, a journey rather than a destination, and that even the smallest gestures of awareness can become powerful catalysts for healing. Life, I realized, is often slow to reveal its truths. Sometimes people awaken only after years of silence. Sometimes love is acknowledged only after neglect. And yet, when understanding finally arrives, it can transform hearts, restore trust, and bring light into spaces that had long felt dark. My son's awakening reminded me that patience and unwavering care are never wasted, that the heart's quiet endurance can lead to the deepest bonds being restored. The atmosphere of our home slowly shifted from distance to warmth, from silence to conversation, from neglect to care. Even simple routines, a shared meal, a morning coffee, a smile across the room became symbols of reconciliation. I realized that endings are not abrupt, dramatic moments, they are gentle transitions, delicate yet profound, formed by the accumulation of recognition, honesty, and empathy. And in that process, hope is restored, hearts are mended, and love finds its way back, quietly but powerfully. As the days unfolded, the warmth between my son and me grew steadier. The awkwardness that had lingered for years dissolved in quiet moments of understanding. He no longer passed me by without a word. He sought my company, and his actions spoke as clearly as any apology. The house, once heavy with distance and silence, now felt lighter, more alive, more like home. It was in the gentle gestures, the thoughtful questions, the shared laughter, and the small acts of kindness that I recognized the power of patience and love. I reflected deeply on the lessons this journey had taught me. Life is rarely immediate in delivering understanding or reconciliation. Sometimes people awaken to the truth only after years of distance. But patience, quiet endurance, and consistent love create space for hearts to heal. God, I realized, sees what others do not. He rewards patience and steadfastness, even when acknowledgement seems delayed. The years of neglect had not been wasted, they had prepared me to meet reconciliation with grace, compassion, and calm. It also reminded me that forgiveness is not a sign of weakness, but of strength. It is in forgiving, in allowing others to recognize their mistakes, and in embracing understanding that the heart finds peace. My son's realization and the slow rebuilding of our bond were proof that love, even when strained, can endure. Relationships, I learned, thrive not through perfection, but through sincerity, reflection, and small, consistent efforts to honor one another. And this is where my story ends tonight. Life doesn't always give us answers right away. Sometimes, God asks us to stay patient, stay kind, and stay silent, not because we are weak, but because He sees what others do not. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect. Maybe someone needed this reminder today. Thank you for listening with an open heart. May God see every silent struggle and replace pain with peace. Until next time, this was Voice of Auntie Universe.